Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If music is your bag, you're going to want to be part of this community by subscribing below to this channel so you don't miss out on our daily content, always celebrating the great artists and the great songs of the rock and roll era. Also, if you want to support our mission of curating the best of this era, the history through interviews and stories behind songs, become a patron and be part of that experience. Now, today we zero in on a song that is most assuredly number one in our hearts, one of my favorites. Winding your way down Baker Street, light in your head and dead on your feet. It was just another crazy day in 1977 when the late Gerry Rafferty wrote that opening line of the seminal soft rock classic, Baker Street.
Winding your way down Baker Street.
Gerry's career was in a holding pattern following the breakup of Stealers Wheel, a band that he co-founded with his childhood chum Joe Egan. Gerry and Joe released a couple of singles as Stealers Wheel that stiffed before striking gold with Stuck in the Middle with You. Great song. That was a number 6 hit in America and a number 8 in the UK in 1973 and a big song in pop culture since then.
Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
They had a mild follow-up hit with Star that stalled at number 29 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 25 in the UK after. But by 1975, Stealers Wheel had split up and Rafferty and Egan wanted to move forward with their respective solo careers. However, the contract that they had signed with A&M Records prohibited them from releasing any music for 3 years. The dispute went to litigation, and it was finally resolved in 1978, which cleared the path for City to City, Gerry Rafferty's stellar debut solo album. That ended up selling over 6 million copies around the world. But it was a painfully stressful 3 years for Gerry Rafferty. But amidst the adversity, he wrote one of the most epic songs of the rock era, Baker Street. And it was all about the frustration that Rafferty was feeling from the legal battles to free himself from the Stealers Wheel contract. He spent a lot of time going back and forth from Glasgow, Scotland to London, England to meet with his lawyers. And while he was in London, he stayed at a friend's flat on Baker Street. It was in that apartment on Baker Street that Gerry wrote a deeply emotive and introspective narrative about a man that drinks all night to forget about everything and dreams about buying some land, giving up the booze and the one-night stands to settle down in a quiet little town. It's these thoughts that we have when we go through adversity. A thought that I've had many times settling down somewhere else. I'm sure you felt it at one time or another.
In some quiet little town and forget about everything.
The last verse of Baker Street conveys Gerry's rapturous liberation from his legal woes. When you wake up, it's a new morning. The sun is shining, it's a new morning, and you're going home.
You're going home.
I mean, simply reading the lyric sheet of Rafferty's tormenting catharsis makes Baker Street a bitingly powerful composition, but the sonic highlights of the track are perhaps even more arresting. Let's start with what is arguably the most recognizable saxophone riff of the rock era, because the backstory of how the sax solo was incorporated in Baker Street is a doozy. The saxophone solo in Baker Street was performed by Raphael Ravenscroft. Ravenscroft, who passed away in 2014, was a relative unknown when he reportedly asked to come into the studio. He was asked to come into the studio and play the sax over a portion of the song that Rafferty had planned for an instrumental break. Ravenscroft claims that Rafferty had a tune with some gaps, and he was asked to fill those gaps with a sax riff. He claims that he authored the riff, but was uncredited. Ravenscroft's recollection of what transpired in the studio differs wildly from Rafferty's and from Hugh Byrne's, who played the blistering guitar solo on Baker Street. Byrne's opposes Ravenscroft's account, stating emphatically that Gerry Rafferty already had the instrumental break designed for the song. Byrne's recounted that he and Gerry were working on Baker Street in the studio and Gerry asked him to have a go at playing the guitar riff over the instrumental break, but after listening to the playback, they both agreed that it would sound better as a sax line. So they enlisted Ravenscroft, who was doing some session work in an adjoining studio. The truth seems to be revealed in a demo of Baker Street that was included in the 2011 reissue of the City to City album, where Rafferty himself is playing an electric guitar riff during the instrumental break. The demo was recorded well before Ravenscroft was even asked to play in the recording session. So there you have it. Surprisingly, Ravenscroft stated many times that he wasn't happy with the recorded version of his sax performance. He said it was out of tune and flat. He was so irritated by the sound of it that for many years he refused to play the solo for a live audience. It's pretty interesting. There's another intriguing subplot to the sax riff controversy of Baker Street. The sax line in Steve Marcus's jazzy instrumental, Half a Heart, from 1968, sounds very similar to the sax riff played by Ravenscroft in Baker Street. If it was lifted from the Steve Marcus track, then Ravenscroft would most likely be the culprit. But Marcus's track was so obscure, it seems really improbable that Ravenscroft would have been aware of it. Still, it seems a little close to be a coincidence. You decide, I guess. The early demo of Gerry Rafferty playing the electric guitar as a placeholder for an instrumental fill on Baker Street should certainly exonerate Rafferty from any conjecture that he plagiarized Steve Marcus, for sure. After the global success of Baker Street, Ravenscroft became a highly sought-after session musician, playing on recordings for some of the biggest stars in the business. There's Marvin Gaye, Pink Floyd, ABBA, Robert Plant in America, and there were quite a few others. Ravenscroft literally wrote the book about sax playing. In fact, he wrote several books about his craft, including The Complete Saxophone Player in 1990. I want to add that the saxophone solo in Baker Street was so popular at that time that it led to what they called the Baker Street phenomenon, that included increased sales for saxophones across the world. And about every act thereafter for the next 10 years started adding saxophone solos to their songs. The aforementioned guitar solo was also a major influence on Slash at Guns N' Roses when he recorded his guitar solo on Sweet Child of Mine. If you listen closely, you can definitely hear that influence. In addition to the incredible guitar work on Baker Street, Hugh Byrne has played on over 130 recordings, including the notable guitar line on Careless Whisper, the epic #1 ballad by George Michael and Wham in 1984. The sax solo on Baker Street usually steals the thunder, but I gotta say, Hugh Byrne's guitar solo on the track is truly inspired. You can't recognize the greatness of Baker Street without praising that guitar solo. Just exquisite. Gerry Rafferty's partner in Stealers Will, Joe Egan, released his debut album in 1979, yielding a mild UK hit with his first single, Back on the Road. Egan would later manage a publishing company from his home in Scotland. Just wanted to give you an update on what happened to him after. Now, following the mega success of City to City, Gerry Rafferty released the album Night Owl in '79. That achieved gold status in America, but far from the phenomenal prosperity of City to City. Sales further eroded with 2 subsequent album releases that didn't produce a hit single, and Gerry turned his back on the record business in 1983 to, in his word, watch his family grow. Rafferty had a notorious aversion with live concert touring, so staying off the road was likely quite relieving for him. Unfortunately, Rafferty's personal life was pretty unsettling. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, Gerry struggled with alcoholism. That led to a terminal case of liver disease, and he sadly passed away in January 2011. Yeah, I believe that Gerry Rafferty is one of the great unsung heroes of popular music. If you go back and listen, really listen to his musical output of the 70s and the 80s, you see that he was really in a league of his own. Just incredible talent. My memory of this song goes really deep. It's one of the first 7 or 8 songs that I remember hearing as a child, before I even knew what music was. I remember my dad played the record, and that sax solo was just alien to my young ears. It scared the hell out of me, really. Later, when I started to understand the lyrics, it's become a go-to song for me for many experiences, good and bad, that I've faced in my life. It's just a tremendous song. Baker Street reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July 1978, and it remained there for 6 straight weeks. Denied the number 1 spot 6 times by Andy Gibbs' unrelenting smash, Shadow Dancing, which stayed in the top position for 7 weeks. The Billboard year-end chart ranked Shadow Dancing as the biggest pop song of '78. I mean, had Baker Street been released a few weeks earlier or even later, it would have been a number 1 hit, no doubt about it, and it should have been. Baker Street is so powerful and cinematic, and it's been used brilliantly in pop culture, from the scene in Good Will Hunting, The Sopranos, Zodiac, and most recently in Billions and Mindhunter. There is this haunting, wistful nostalgia at the core of this song that is undeniable. And at the same time, it gives off like this secretive, almost sinister vibe. I always thought that it should have been used in the series finale for Mad Men. So bear with me here for a minute. Mad Men is one of my favorite shows ever. And in my perfect ending to the show, one that I feel would have honored the character of Don Draper and what would happen in real life, I think Don just keeps screwing up. And we go 15 years into the future, smack dab in the middle of the 80s, where we see a washed up, middle-aged, alcoholic Don Draper living in a really crappy apartment in New York, the wife beater on, Miami Vice jacket and all. The last scene would show, there's a knock at the door, and a hungover Don answers the door to find his daughter and grandkids dropping by like a gift for Father's Day. And awkwardly, Don lets him into the apartment that's filled with empty wine cooler bottles and pizza boxes, and they kind of say, we got to go, it's getting late. Don, of course, fumbles around for the right words. He gets one of his grandkids' names wrong when he tries to make small talk. And as his family leaves and he watches them and you see this awkward relationship, he wanders, over to the couch. He sits down, he opens up a wine cooler, lights up a cigarette, and as he lays his arm across the top of the couch, we hear Baker Street playing out for the last 30 seconds as the camera just pans out for Don Draper, who's wasted his talent, his role as a husband and father, and essentially his life, as he looks off with this like methodical and regretful stare, and it turns into that, iconic silhouette that are at the opening credits, and that song would just paint the perfect picture. I mean, it's a depressing ending, but it's the most worthy and fitting finale for that character in that show. The song is the key, though. Baker Street, in just a few notes, can convey so many emotions. I mean, fear, loathing, regret, desolation, as well as hope and faith for a better tomorrow. Considering the challenges that Gerry Rafferty overcame to release his solo material and write this epic song and gift it to the masses, it would have been so poetic for Baker Street to not only hit number 1, but also win every award given that year. It's one of those masterpieces that is more than deserving for such accolades, but many decades later, the song stands alone as a timeless triumph of the human spirit. It's far outlasted the acclaim of number 1 song from the 70s, including its nemesis, Shadow Dancing. It's both a sonic and lyrical triumph that will continue to captivate millions of listeners for generations to come. Thank you, Gerry, for this uncompromising and legendary composition. Leave us a comment about Gerry Rafferty and this amazing song. Tell us about, any experiences you have and memories that you've had that are tied to the song. I want to hear them. To hear the song, click on the playlist below to get the records, see our Amazon links. If you like our content, join our community by subscribing below to this channel. Help us keep the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends. Thank you.